Hello, again.
Hi, Mr. Tsubaki. Hi, good afternoon.
Okay, I'll get started because we're recording. If people come in late, they can go back and watch the beginning again or whatever. No problem, right? Anytime you guys have questions, just go ahead and ask right in the middle. You don't have to wait till the end or anything like that. A lot of this, especially like, some of you that are here, I've already talked to you about recommendations about how I think students should prepare in a way that I call sustainable. What I mean by sustainable is like that the method will work no matter how much material we cover. Okay, because like you can pretty much do things your own way first semester with only 6 topics, right? You can do it efficiently, you could do it inefficiently, you could cram. A lot of things work if you're only studying 6 chapters and you're you start a couple weeks before. Second semester, then it becomes slightly more challenging to do it any old way because the amount of work, depending on how you do it, normally would double. And so like what was originally 5 hours is now 10. And so it becomes that much more difficult to fit it all in. So what I mean by sustainable is that the first, second, third, and fourth semester would take a reasonable amount of time for preparation during the last couple weeks before the exam. Okay. Okay. So again, there's no secrets or magic. The only thing that I'm telling you is the way to make it sustainable is to front load everything and to leave as little as possible for the last 2 weeks. And anything you could do beforehand, do beforehand. And why is that difficult? Because that is like totally against the philosophy of any red-blooded high school or college student in the world, right? It's like the tendency is always to procrastinate. And what I'm telling you to do is do the exact opposite. Whatever you can do today, do it, right? Don't leave it for tomorrow. That's like, it hits a lot of you guys on two sides because not only you're a high school student, you're a Brazilian. And there's a lot of practical reasons why Brazil, it's not just that Brazilians have a reputation for leaving things for the last minute. There are a lot of practical reasons why Brazilians should leave things for the last minute. And we can talk about that another time, but I'm not being preconceituoso. I'm just saying it from experience living in Brazil. I had to adapt the way I live because I was not naturally that way, but I learned why I had to be that way in Brazil. Okay. So it's like, you know, with all these forces pushing you to procrastinate, it's hard to do the opposite. But what I'm telling you to do is do the opposite. The other thing that's kind of like counter to our instincts today as YouTube viewers is notes. Okay. Writing down notes on paper with a pencil, abbreviating things, organizing things with handwritten notes. That is like not the way we live today, right? It's like a lot of things we don't need to take notes anymore because we know that we could just like, it's like, how do you make, pancakes again? Oh, I can just like, say how to make pancakes on YouTube and I'll immediately have a video and it'll take me 3 minutes to watch the video and then I'll have it. There's no reason to like write down a recipe for pancakes for later, right? So difficult for us to have that mindset, but as I'll mention later, in this particular case, it has to be notes because that's the only thing that fits into the time that we have, okay? Okay, so here on the top part, I listed some common things that people do when they are in the process of reviewing. I am listing them here right now for the sole purpose of looking to see how long each one takes, okay? Just to kind of like do a rough calculation to show you why most things are not sustainable as far as preparing for the IB exam for math. So of these common review activities, there are, the most popular is doing problems from the packet. Hopefully people, when they say they do problems from the packet, they're not doing every problem from the packet, but they're doing a subset of the problems, choosing problems in some specific way. And maybe they're choosing the ones that they had difficulty with. Maybe they're doing one from each page just as a general review. Maybe they're actually doing several in a row because there's a certain topic that they didn't quite get the first time and they kind of put it off for the final review to actually understand it. I estimate that that strategy probably takes 1 to 5 hours for each unit, depending on how many problems the person is doing. But I would say a minimum of 1, and like hopefully they're not doing the whole packet, so then the maximum of 5 hours. Redoing the mock exam and watching the solution video, that's also very common. I would say 1 to 2 hours to do that. Doing the mock exam, I think is like usually something people like to do, and it has worth in if time allows. And then watching the video, I usually recommend watching the whole video when you do watch the video because the video in itself is a review. I talk about things in the video that are not in the mock exam. So, so if you do both of those things, 1 to 2 hours, right? Read through your blog. I don't know how many people do this, but your blog, one of the reasons why I ask you to do blogs is so that you do have some kind of written notes about each unit. Depending on how you choose the options, it might have exactly the thing that you need to study. Like some people might choose their blog option based on what was difficult for them, what's hard to remember. And if they choose it that way, then hey, that's perfect. That's exactly what you would want to read about when you go back and review the unit. On the other hand, some people do options 1, 2, and 3, no matter what they are. Some people do the easiest ones and some stuff that they never forget. And then in that case, the blog might be worthless. Here at the bottom, what I did was first of all, what I did was I said, okay, let's say that the nominal time to prepare a unit is 2 hours, which would be any combination of these activities on top, limiting to yourself to 2 hours. It could be like 1 or 2 of these activities. If your nominal preparation time per unit is 2 hours, then we can kind of calculate how long your review process would take for first semester, second semester, third semester, and fourth semester. And although first semester, many people might be able to find 12 hours in the last 2 weeks of school to study just math, you could do something quite reasonable, like study 1 hour a day for almost 2 weeks, right? 24 hours, 36 hours, and 44 hours are probably unreasonable, impossible to do in the last 2 weeks before the final exam. So even putting like a very small amount of time per unit, which is 2 hours, this quickly becomes unsustainable already in the second semester, okay? I also put down here, this is like, depends on the person, but I just put like what I think is like a above average time that somebody might allocate to studying only for the IB math final exam at the end of the semester as 8 hours. I think anything more than that, and you are not sleeping, you are not studying for other final exams you need to study for, right? It's like 8 hours is already, I think, a lot for one of your 6 subjects. Let's say that you spend more time on math than anything else, maybe then 8, okay? So if you look at the 8-hour time limit, even the first semester of 12 hours is not sustainable, right? You're already going over the time limit that you have. So this slide is basically to say to you that, hey, these strategies here, doing a combination of these strategies per unit is not something that is going to work past the first semester, okay? So what do you do? The things on the last slide, the combination of them added together, accumulating every single semester is not sustainable. So what is sustainable? So the first couple things, I wrote that they're obvious, but I'm going to say them anyway. The first thing is, when you finish a unit, you should be like at the peak of your knowledge for that unit. Do everything possible to be there. You're never going to be quite there again in your life. And even at the end of the IB course, you probably won't be as good as you were at the end of the unit, okay? So if you are already arriving at the end of the unit with imperfect knowledge, then you're already like, the bar is already lower and you're not going to be able to even be, you have no potential for being at 100% at the end of the IB course, right? So first of all, don't leave the unit without understanding everything that you think you want to understand completely, right? And if you want to get a 7 or something high, you should try to understand everything, right? And if you make a strategic decision, you're like, well, I don't think I'm going to do that well in trig, so I'm just not going to study any of the trig. That's a strategic decision, and maybe in that case, you could say, okay, so for trig, I'm just gonna do bad. If you made a calculated strategy decision, keeping in mind the percentage you need to get and like, what IB grade you're going for, that maybe is valid, okay? So, but otherwise, make sure you understand everything at the end of the unit. The other thing is, every time you leave a class, you should never leave the class with open questions. And if you do, then immediately try to make sure you do schedule a homework club or something to get back on schedule. Because, falling behind in one class, the very next class you're losing double, right? Because like usually what you didn't understand the previous class hurts you in the following class. And not only do you not understand the previous thing, you're not progressing on the next thing either. So it really hurts you. And the way I structure the class is to try to make it so that you never, I try not to make it easy for you to fall behind. And the way I do that is I try to make you do ed puzzles before you come to class so that you already start the class with questions for me. And then when you're doing the other pages, you can ask more questions. And then when you get to the end of the class, hopefully you're like, okay, I've done the 4 pages. I've asked a lot of questions. I think I'm good. And then you go to the quiz or the flip grid, and that's your chance of figuring out, was I really good, right? It's like a spot check on what you've learned. Hopefully you're getting 4s. And if you're consistently not getting 4s, then what I suggest you do is talk to me about maybe your overall strategy, about like, why is it that, all this effort and I'm not able to get consistently high grades on the quizzes or the flip grid, okay? So we should talk about that if you need it. Like the third thing here is about the homework club. So like if you fall behind in number 1 or number 2, definitely try to remedy that with appointments or homework club. Talk to me during the Zoom, etc., right? Let's see. Next page. Okay. Let's talk about the notes, okay? Why do I say take notes? When I say notes, I don't mean like, look at how many notes I took, Mr. Subaki. It's like, I have all these notes for the whole year, and it's like a big stack of paper, and it's got your packets, and it's got the mock exam, and it's got blah, blah, blah. That's not what I mean by notes. I mean condensed notes, like pithy notes. So just for comparison, let's look at all the paper that you do have. You have 20 pages of textbook chapters. For each chapter, you have like 20 pages. The packet is like from 5 to 20 pages, right? You got that every unit. You have an hour and a half to 8 hours of solution videos on YouTube for every single unit. That is like too massive to be useful, right? It's like there's such thing as having too many notes. If you have too many notes, it also becomes unreasonable to study those notes, right? So when I say notes in this case, I mean like a reasonable amount of notes that you could read through in a few hours and be back to where you were before. What else do I have on this page? Common review activities, nominally 44 hours of preparation time. Okay, so the other thing is like the notes are trying to make it possible to replace the 44 hours of preparation time with something that takes a lot less. Because let's say that you've budgeted 8 hours to study. We have 8 hours to study 22 units, not 44, okay? So how are we gonna get there? We're gonna get there with notes. The amount of notes that I'm suggesting is like half a page, one side for each unit. If you only have half a page, one side for each unit, then the whole 2-year course will be about 10 pages one side or 5 pages both sides. And I'm not saying super dense notes like your note sheet. It's not like that. I'm going to show you an example in a minute, okay? But just a half a page, because I think a half a page one side should be enough to summarize the important ideas from any of the units we study, no matter if we're talking about applications or analysis. When do you do it? You do it at the peak of your knowledge. Remember, I was saying at the very end of the unit, you should be at the peak of your knowledge for that unit. So it would be right after you finish the packet, or right after you do the mock exam, right after you do the reflection for the mock exam, maybe right after you do the exam itself. Any of those points in time might be the best moment for you to do this. Again, all your instincts will tell you that that is not the time to do it, because you could do it later because it doesn't matter now, or you're really busy with getting ready for the unit exam. You don't have time to do it now, etc. So you have to resist the urge, because to make it when you are at the peak of your knowledge is the most efficient time to do it, right? You'd be able to do it faster because you may not have to refer to a lot of reference materials in order to make your notes at that time. So hopefully it's not something that would take a long time. I'm budgeting like 30 minutes to 2 hours. To actually make the note sheet, it's probably like 15 minutes if you have everything really well reflected in your head. But sometimes making the note sheet, you kind of have to like digest all that information that you've just learned before you actually can organize it somewhere on the paper. And I'll talk about that again when I show you the example again. In addition to the fact that you're leaving yourself notes to make it possible to like supercharge or accelerate your preparation process in the last week before the final exam, you're also going through the reflection process, which is why maybe making the notes is going to take you a couple hours for that unit, because maybe there's like loose ends that you didn't think about up until that time. Maybe the process of making the notes brings up questions. Maybe you haven't really like thought about all the components you learned in a holistic way and like put them together in like a big picture way. And like that kind of thinking sometimes takes time. And if you're doing that while you're making the notes, then it's going to take longer. But that process is necessary for your learning, right? It's like that probably is your learning. It's like all the problem practice and stuff. If you don't solidify that in some way in your memory by actually doing the reflection, it's probably all going to be gone in 2 weeks or more, right? So like the process of organizing in your head, rereading it, reorganizing it, recalling it, all of that helps make it part of your long-term memory instead of your short-term memory. So the reflection process is just as important as leaving yourself the artifact of the note card or whatever. Where do you do it? I would do it on some kind of special paper, just because some of us are disorganized, and if we do it on random scraps of paper, we're going to lose it, right? Note cards are kind of good because if you get the big note cards, those are about the right size. They're like stiff paper. It's different than every other paper you use. They last long, right? So I suggest note cards. You could also put them all in a special notebook, right? You could set aside a notebook, which is going to be like maybe the first 20 pages is going to be reserved for these special notes for math. Just don't like in your math notebook, don't like say, oh, every time I finish a unit, I'm going to put one page, which is going to be my special notes for the unit, because then what you end up with is a 200-page notebook, and every 10 pages there's an important page, and in between there's 9 pages which are worthless after 2 months, right? So I would not do that. I could make these notes, right? And I have made notes, and you'll see them at the end of this, but my notes are probably not that effective for you. The person who should make these notes to optimize their impact and efficiency is you, okay? You kind of have to make your own notes. Number one, because those notes are going to be perfect for you. Number two, because like I said, half the benefit is actually you preparing it. So if someone else prepares it for you, like if I prepared them for you, it would defeat half the purpose of the notes. And probably the other half it would put it in danger because you're like, I don't like the way Mr. Tsubaki thinks. I don't like the way he organizes the data. It doesn't fit the way I do. Okay. So again, you should be the one that put together these notes. I already talked about that it takes 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how much reflection was left to do, right? These are ideas on how to create, and I think this is also personal. It's like, where do you get the content for your notes? You know, all the content is in the packet. I just don't know if the packet is the most efficient place to see it or not. If you're capable of like skimming through the packet at a pretty rapid pace and like picking out, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this page. This is a page where we did this big idea. Oh, I remember this. This is when I did. If you're like that, then the packet I think is a pretty good place to skim through and like write down the ideas that you see. It's kind of hard to do that as you're going through the packet because like, since we're like, you know, focused on page 1, focused on page 2, focused on page 3, it's, you only see what was really important and what was actually just like a preliminary introduction to the other thing once you've actually done everything, right? So after you've done the whole packet is the best time to go look through page 1 through page 10 and like say, oh yeah, this is important, this is important. Because then you like, you know, if you've only seen like one dog, then you think that all the dogs are the same size. If you've seen 10 dogs, you know what a big dog is and you know what a small dog is. So if you've gone through the 10 pages of the packet, you know which one of the ideas is relatively more important than the other and which one is bigger than the other, right? So that when you get to the end of the packet, you have a perspective, right, that enables you to say that, oh, well, actually, it's kind of like I was talking to Inez today about page 1, where you were like doing those problems with the rectangles. And I said, well, you know, actually, if you're like thinking about the exam, this page 1 is not that important, not from the perspective of doing this kind of problem. It's more important just from understanding what the integral is, right? But you're not going to really know that for sure until you've gone through the whole packet and you're like, what was page 1 again? It's like, I didn't use page 1 to do any of these integral problems. What the heck did we do that for? And then, you know, sometimes the perspective only comes when you finish it, right? Calculator procedures are, okay, so skimming through the packet again was the first thing. And like, what do you write down from it? Well, one of the things that you might write down are like, Alejo, I was talking to you today about something that you found difficult, which was how to find the tangent line equation, right? So that would be something that's in the packet that if you find it difficult to remember, you would definitely put that in your notes for the unit, right? So maybe there's things like that that are like kind of receita de bolo, which you are going to write down word for word in a corner because it's like personally it was difficult for you to remember. So it's like, why not just like use part of the space to remember that? I don't want to have to go look it up in some other resource, right? Calculator procedures, especially for the analysis people, since you don't use them that much, it might be useful to write those down step by step also in your packet, because like sometimes when we are taking unit exams and I really emphasize the non-calculator procedures, you might get the impression that calculator procedures aren't that important. And they are less important when you're doing unit exams because the unit exams don't have time limits, right? So a lot, you know, like most of the paper 2 problems, which is the calculator section, even the ones where you should use the calculator, if you had all the time in the world, you could do the problem without the calculator. So why should you use the calculator then? Because on the IB exam, you know, most people run out of time when they're doing the exam if they're going for, you know, a 5 through a 7, right? They run out of time to do the problems they know how to do, as opposed to other people who are maybe going for a 4, where they run out of problems that they know how to do before they run out of time. Okay, so since time is a factor for the people shooting for a higher score, you need to know how to use the calculator, and you need to recognize at what point you should start using the calculator. Some people get so used to doing the problem without the calculator that it takes them 2 minutes to realize they are wasting time by doing a calculator procedure without the calculator. Okay, so and that is like a practice thing. So that's kind of a different issue. But you should definitely have the calculator procedure in your notes If it's something that you don't use very often and you're going to need to cram for it later, put that in there. Mock exam and blog are good places to get big ideas, but you have to keep in mind that, and I talk to people about this when they talk to me about, it's like, how do you choose the mock exam problem? How do you choose the exam problem? I should put exam here too. I keep thinking, you know, especially since we haven't taken an exam in 6 months, that like, that's not even a thing, but it is, right? So like, looking through your exams, looking at your mock exams, those are a source for you to like figure out what was hard for you and what are the things that are going to appear in the exam. But again, it's like, what if there's something in the packet that did not appear on the mock exam? Okay, a lot of times what I'll do is in the solution video of the mock exam, I try to bring that up, right? It's like, oh, what if they would have asked you for the normal line equation instead of the tangent line equation? Sometimes I'll say that during the solution video just to like have one more opportunity to say that, even though I didn't put the normal line equation problem in the mock exam or something, right? So the video might have it, but it's probably easier just to look at the first option here and make sure that everything that's in the first option is covered in the mock exam. See what's not covered in the mock exam. Make sure that the things that aren't covered are in there, okay? Sometimes there's things that I think are really challenging that I avoid putting for you in a unit exam because I know it's going to make everybody's grade lower. Sometimes I'll even avoid putting in the mock exam, so because I don't want to scare the heck out of you, because a lot of people will think, oh, if it's in the mock exam, then it's very probable that he's going to put it in the real exam. Or if the mock exam is this hard, that means the real exam is going to be this hard. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, it's not that this problem is never going to show its ugly face to you ever, but it's not going to be in my class that it's going to show it to you. Okay, and just because I don't put it on the mock exam or on the exam doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that you might have bad luck and sometimes it's going to appear someday, which is why you do number one. You go through the whole packet and make sure that anything that was hard for you is definitely noted in the in your notes. If you think, no, this is way too hard for the IB exam, you could ask me about it. You could say, does this ever appear in the IB exam? And I'll be honest with you. I'll say what I've seen. And maybe the answer will be, no, it doesn't appear. This is more for the IA or something, right? Sort of like page 1 today, right? Have I ever seen that in an SL IB exam? No, I don't think it's ever going to appear in an SL exam. It might, but it hasn't up until now. Okay, it is something that you use a lot in the IA. So I can help you with that if you're wondering about specific cases. Where were we? Don't assume that you are going to have time to memorize at a later date, things like unit circle or calculator procedures. Okay. If you like save a few things to cram at the last minute, like maybe unit circle is your weak thing, maybe calculator procedures are your weak thing. If you just like have a few things that you're going to cram, that's okay, right? But if you have like a whole bunch of things you're going to cram, in the end, I think that you're basically going to not remember a lot of it, right? Because under the pressure of the IB exam, the first time you've crammed it, you might have trouble remembering. That is why I put so much emphasis on the quizzes during unit circle to try to force you guys to like memorize the sine, cosine, tangent values, because I think that little bit of effort a year ahead of time, if you do it the right way, is going to last forever. And I've already seen that many people have lost whatever they had, right? Unfortunately, we didn't finish the whole cycle for everybody, but you know, everybody knows like in what way they studied, and some people crammed for that, and so they didn't really get what they needed to out of that. So if you are going for a 7, write down the methods examples to solve the hardest problems in the packet or review. Okay, so when you take an IB exam, they don't give you all like medium problems, kind of the way I give you on a mock exam or an exam. You notice that I never give you like a trivial, easy problem on the mock exam or exam. I don't want to waste valuable test time and valuable points on figuring out that you know how to do a trivial problem. Okay. I want to, like, each one of those points, I want it to matter and tell me something about how much you know. So usually I don't put any really easy problems. I also don't put any really hard problems that, only 3 people are going to get it right, because that's kind of a useless use of space too. So the problems I give you on my exams are chosen to be more in the middle. On the IB exam, you'll notice that some of the problems are like so easy that I would never have given that problem to you. And some of them are so hard that I would never give that problem to you. But the reason why the IB does that is because they're not trying to just figure out who's a 4 or 5. They want to know who's a 1. They want to know who's a 2. They want to know who's a 3. And in order to know if you're a 1, 2, or a 3, they need to give a bunch of easy problems, because the 1 isn't going to figure them out, but the 2 will. If they want to know if you're a 5, 6, or a 7, then they need to give really hard problems that maybe almost nobody's going to get. So if you're trying to be a 7, then of course you need to be able to do those hard problems that nobody's going to get. And it's pretty easy at the time of studying each unit to know which those problems are, because they correspond to the hard problems in the packet, right? So when you're going through the packet, usually there's like certain problems that's like, whoa, that was hard. I definitely needed to watch the solution video to be able to do that problem, right? Those are the problems that are going to turn into the problems to see if you're a 7, okay? And the IB exam isn't going to be full of those problems. And depending on the unit, you would never see that problem, because we have basically 20 packets, right? And how many of those super hard problems from the 20 units are actually going to be on the IB exam? Maybe like 3, okay? So, you know, 18 of the, or 19 of the 22 units are not going to have a super hard problem, and 3 of them are going to have a super hard problem. Which 3 are going to have a super hard problem? You won't know. So if you're going for 7, you kind of have to know how to do the super hard problem for all 22 units, because that is the best way to be able to do 1 or 2 of the super hard problems. You don't have to get them all right, because like you can miss, 10 points right off the top. You could like not do one whole problem on the IB paper and still get a 7, right? It's forgiving, but like if you miss like every single hard problem, then you're probably going to be a 6. Okay, so for 7s, definitely pay attention to the hardest concept in each unit, identify what those are, because that is basically predicting what the hard problem is going to look like on the exam. Unfortunately, you're going to have 20 different problems that you're going to have to study. And, if you actually have time to study those 20 scenarios, then maybe you are heading for a 7, because that means you're so comfortable with everything else that you can focus on the pepinos. Okay. Let's see. Next 2 pages are actual examples I made. I made these examples in like 10 or 15 minutes, because like this is my life, right? So I just jotted things down from my own head. Of course, I have spent hours of my life reflecting on each of the units so that I could explain it better to you, right? Because like, the one of the ways that um, I try to explain things to you is to put everything in a context that I think makes it easy to understand. And the reason why I have that context is because I've spent a lot of time thinking about things that I already knew how to do, right? It's one thing for me to understand it well enough for me to do the problem. It's another for me to understand it well enough to explain it to you in an easy way so that you can understand it together with me, right? So, for example, if you look at this one here, this is a math analysis topic, quadratics. It's our first topic, right? Um, and this is the way I think about quadratics in my head, okay? If I was to explain in 20 minutes to somebody what you need to know about quadratics to do well on the exam, I would probably draw something like this as a visual guide to explain to somebody what they need to know, because this is kind of the way I think. It's like I had a student that graduated a couple years ago, and like I I drew something like this, and like they're like, oh, Mr. Tsubaki, always with the arrows, right? That's like whenever I organize stuff in my head, it usually is kind of like a mind map with directional arrows, right? Mind maps don't sometimes have directions, but usually my mind map diagrams do have direction, okay? So here is a perfect example of the way I think, and it's applied to quadratics. And if you look at any part of this, you might recall um, the concept, and you might think, that's not the way I would have done it. And that is fine, because you probably have a way that you would like to think of it that is different than mine. And that is why everybody should make their own notes, right? So that is quadratics for analysis. You can see that there's not a lot of like writing as far as phrases and stuff, very brief phrases. Not a lot of terminology. The terminology is not to like define things. The terminology is used to abbreviate things, right? To make things like more compact. Sometimes I'll use terminology like foil or what else is there? I wrote, for example, y-intercept or something like that. I'll use like math words to make things compact and not have to put a long description there. The next page, I did one for applications. Is there anybody from applications here today, or is everybody analysis? Okay, but some of the people from applications wanted a recording, so I made one for applications too. The one I made for applications actually has crossover to you guys because it's linear regression. Okay, linear regression is a topic in both analysis and applications. This one I kind of based as on the center of the graph of linear regression, and then I kind of like have all my arrows coming out of the graph referring to different things in the graph. The only thing that doesn't apply to you guys is that your table here, this annoying table that you need to memorize for the IB exam, yours is slightly different because the IB decided to make your table different than the applications table. I think in your table, 0.9 to 1 is actually very strong, and then 0.75 to 0.9 is strong. So that's the difference, I think, between you guys and this one. So don't like look at this and assume that it applies to you guys too. A little bit different. Okay, so those are two examples. What I'm imagining is a half a sheet of notes for every single unit. So you would have about 22 of these when you finish the course. Again, ideally, you would do these when you finish a unit. Now, we've already finished like 14 units or something. So you're like, but I don't have 14 of these yet. Yeah. So for people that have asked me about things like this, I've always suggested this to them last year, but I haven't pushed you guys to do this because the way I push you guys to take any notes is the blog, because I can grade the blog. And if I grade it, a lot of people will do it just because I grade it, okay? And like these kind of notes here, I don't know if it's possible for me to force you to make these notes and to have me grade it and whatever, right? So I tried to do originally the blogs like that. The first blog I did, I said to the student, what are the big ideas in this chapter? And then they just came up with a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't think was really the big idea. And then I realized I had to be more specific. And so that's why in the blogs, I ask really specific things, right? And because I really want to direction the student to the real big ideas, but I kind of need to hold the hand to do that. So in the end, even though my original vision was to force you guys to make something like this, the blog turned out to be something a little bit different because most people needed that scaffolding, okay? Finally, this is the last slide. Okay, now that you have all these half sheets of paper, what do you do with them? That's kind of up to you, but the last thing, or the last two things, are what I envisioned that you should use them for. The second to last thing is use them during the last week or two before your final exam or IB exam, and that is what you are going to study. Are you going to study anything else? No. Ideally, you would only be looking at these half sheets of paper during the last week or two before the exams. because everything is on this half sheet of paper, theoretically, right? And if not everything is on this half sheet of paper, that means maybe you have some open ends, right? That like you were unable to conclude the unit, mastering everything in there, you left stuff for later, et cetera, and that's okay to a certain extent, but that's not the recipe to get a 7 if that's what your intention is, right? The other thing which you could use it for is to generate your note sheet, right? So like a lot of people kind of make their note sheet. I don't know exactly how people make their note sheet, but I'm pretty sure that they look at a whole bunch of different papers. And ideally, to make a note sheet at the end of the semester, first of all, you shouldn't be like remaking your whole note sheet. You should be using the last note sheet and just adding things to it. But to look at the last 6 units, I imagine that the best way to do it, if you have these half sheets of paper, is to look only at the half sheet of paper to make your notes, to make the note sheet section. So that's another thing useful that comes out of it. What else could you do with it? Well, since it's compact and it doesn't take that long to read through, you could use these throughout the semester, throughout the year, throughout the course, right? You could like do periodic review of previous units constantly. Like, you know, you guys are going to think this is like too nerdy, but you could put them next to your bed, and like on nights that you have difficulty going to sleep, instead of grabbing your cell phone and playing your favorite video game, I bet these note sheets would do a much better job of putting you to sleep than your video game. You could grab these note sheets, you could look through 2 or 3 of them, and you're like, oh yeah, those were the days, quadratics, when math analysis was not that complicated. You could like go through those note sheets and like review, and that is definitely going to be better than just looking at them once every semester. If you're looking at them once a week, twice a week, once a month, whatever, anything is better than just looking at them at the end of the semester. Okay, end of the semester is like, okay, hopefully everybody does that, but you can figure out ways to maybe look at them more frequently than that. Another thing you might do is you might tape them in front of your desk, especially while we're in online class. You guys probably spend a lot more time at your bedroom desk than you normally do. You could have them on your wall, and like anytime you're staring blankly, you don't have to stare blankly anymore. You could stare at one of your favorite units, right? Okay, so that was the last slide. I don't think I said anything really surprising. Some of you probably know every single thing that I said in this because I've talked to you about it. And for some of you, maybe we've never had this talk, and it's kind of like, wow, I wish Mr. Subaki would have told me before to make notes about each unit. Well, you're kind of halfway there. You got your blog, right? And maybe not your blog, but maybe a friend's blog might be halfway there. So yeah, there's that. Anybody have any questions about anything I talked about? Are you
No, I don't think
sure?
so.
No? Okay.
No.
Go ahead, Tommy.
No, I just said no because like nobody was answering, so I just said
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously we have many more months together. So if you start doing something like this and questions come up, of course, you can ask me anytime. What's really hard is to actually do this, right? I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I don't think I've ever had somebody come back and say, hey, Mr. Zubaki, that thing you suggested, I started doing it and it's working great. I don't think anybody has ever even said the not working great part. If they would just say that they started doing it, that would already be something. But like, if I was in your position, this is what I would do. And you're like, you probably say, hey, did you ever do this when you were taking high school calculus? And the answer is, I kind of did. You know, I had this unrealistic expectation that I studied engineering in college. I had this unrealistic expectation that when I set foot on the college campus, that they would expect me to remember all the math and physics that I ever learned before. And if I didn't remember it, then that would cost me, is what I thought. Okay. Now, to some extent, that was true because like there's placement exams and things like that. I didn't end up taking any of those. Um, some people do though. So like as I was going through, especially math in calculus, I kind of like made these notes that were similar to this to like be able to remember it later. I took 3 semesters of calculus before I went to college, and so it was quite a bit more than what you guys do. So there was a lot of calculus that today I don't remember them anymore, but somewhere I put it in a notebook, and then that's the way I intended to study for it. If I arrived on college campus and they said, "Hey, Monday there's a placement test for calculus. Are you ready?" Then I would at least have like a few notes to look at. I also did the same thing for I did the same thing 2 more times. I did the same thing when I was thinking about doing a PhD. And like when you do a PhD, they ask you to do an oral exam with multiple professors. Uh, and the professor basically can ask you anything about math, physics, or electrical engineering that he wants to. And of course, a lot of things you're not going to be able to answer. But every time somebody goes through the exam, they write down all the questions that the professors answered with the name of the professor, and they put it in this big book. Back then they didn't have internet, but they just put it in this big Xerox book. And so you can go back and look at each professor's questions for the last 20 years or whatever you want to, right? So when I studied for that exam, I also made like a little book for myself so that I could study that the night before the exam. And finally, when I became a math teacher, I don't know if you know this, but to become a math teacher, to get a license to be a math teacher, you actually need to take a math exam to show that you can do math. And, a lot of the math on there is math that sometimes I never had, right? They have like topics on there that were not on the list of topics that I studied when I became an engineer. I had to study for that exam. I had to learn some things that I had never known before. I had to review stuff that I thought was hard to remember. And I made a little notebook like this for doing that exam. So I never had to take the IB exam, but there were those 3 times in my life where I either took a comprehensive math exam or I thought I would have to, and I wrote everything down. And it really did help. The last couple nights, it was like I was not doing hundreds of problems, anything. I was just like looking at a few notes and saying, oh yeah, that, oh yeah, that, and then like putting away and going to sleep early, getting rest. Okay. So I think it works. And if you have any questions about doing it, let me know. But like the most important part, the hardest part to do is to start early and to do it ao longo dos 2 anos and not all at the last minute. So the problem is if you come to me at the end and you say, well, I didn't do what you said, but how do I implement it now in April of 2021? And then I'll be like, you got a time machine? Okay. So, okay. Well, thanks for coming. And anybody that missed it, I will save the recording and post it in Schoology. Okay. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
Mr. Bucky.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, just a quick question before I go.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we make one of these packets, would it be okay to ask you like to go over it, like briefly, just to check if there's
Sure.
anything missing? Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
you like and if you want to do that, like it's kind of a good way for like let's say that you're someone who does it right before you take your exam, the unit exam. It's kind of like you know how like I ask you to make a mind map so that I can help you figure out what IA to do.
Yep.
So if you show me this half sheet of paper before you take the unit exam, I could look at that and it's kind of like a brain dump of Bruna, right before you take the exam. And then I could say, oh, Bruna, did you know that this is wrong? Or, oh, you don't have anything about this concept. Don't you want to like write something about this concept? So it is maybe like, it could be like a useful way of you getting feedback on stuff that it's like, this is what I thought was important. Is that okay, or it's like, this is how I understand it. Is it correct, right? And I can look at that and like give you feedback like almost immediately just from reading the thing, right? So yeah, that could be very useful for reviewing even for the unit exam.
All right, thank you. I might end up
Okay.
doing it over the break to just take advantage of the time, and since the test is going to be after that. Well, thank
That's
you.
a good
Have
time
a
to
nice
start
day.
for this one.
Yeah, it is,
Okay.
definitely. Have a nice day
All
and a
right.
nice break.
You too. Bye.
Bye.